Maria thought her life was set: wealth, power, and security. But when Lily, the little girl she once saved, walks into her office years later, revealing a secret that could shatter everything Maria has built, her world turns upside down. What she uncovers next will leave her questioning everything she believed. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Maria Harris trudged along the dimly lit streets of her neighborhood, the weight of the day's work pressing on her tired shoulders. The concrete beneath her feet was cracked, and the distant hum of city traffic echoed through the cold night air. It was the kind of neighborhood where people rarely stopped to talk, where you didn't make eye contact unless you had to. Maria had learned long ago not to expect much from the world around her. As a social worker in this part of town, she was used to the injustices, the broken homes, the unspoken pain that festered beneath the surface of every worn-down apartment building. But tonight, something was different. The cries were faint at first, little more than a quiver of sound carried by the wind, but they grew louder, more desperate. A soft, strangled whimper that, despite the weight of the world on her shoulders, made Maria freeze. She stopped, her heart quickening as the sound pierced the night. She wasn't one to ignore something like this. Not on her watch. In the blink of an eye, she followed the cries, each step bringing her closer to the source. Her breath hitched, her pulse thrumming in her ears. But she pushed forward, her instincts driving her toward the child's voice. Turning a corner, she found her. A small girl huddled against the grimy wall of an alley, her clothes torn and her face streaked with dirt and tears. The child's wide, terrified eyes locked onto Maria's, as if unsure whether this stranger was friend or foe. She couldn't have been more than 7, small, fragile, with the unmistakable signs of abuse visible in the bruises that marred her arms, her legs, and the deep, dark circles beneath her eyes. The sight hit Maria like a punch to the gut. The girl's skin was cold to the touch, her tiny hands shaking as she held herself together, desperate for some sense of security. Maria knelt down, her voice gentle but firm. "Hey there, it's okay. You're safe now." The words felt hollow, but she forced them out, knowing the child needed to hear them, needed to believe them. She offered her hand, her heart breaking at the hesitation in the girl's eyes before the trembling little hand slipped into hers. She didn't waste a moment. Maria pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed the police, her voice steady as she explained the situation. But it was the girl who kept Maria anchored. She wrapped her arms around the little body, holding her close, whispering reassurances into the girl's ear as they waited. "I won't leave you. Not now. Not ever," Maria promised, though she didn't know what the future held, only that she couldn't let the child face it alone. The sirens wailed in the distance, a sound that always signaled the arrival of help. But for Maria, it was more than that. It was the beginning of a promise, one she would keep with every ounce of her being. She watched as the police took the girl to safety. Her heart ached with the knowledge that the world was still cruel enough to do this to a child. But there was hope now, and that was enough. As the night stretched on, Maria's mind remained fixed on the little girl, Lily. She never expected anything in return. She had helped countless others before, but this one felt different. Like the world had aligned in that moment for a reason Maria could not yet comprehend. She only hoped that, somehow, Lily would one day find happiness again, a happiness that would carry her through the nightmares that had been her reality. For now, all Maria could do was watch the girl disappear into the back of the ambulance and wonder if she'd ever see her again. Maria had long since accepted that life was a series of small, repetitive struggles. The days blurred together, each one a mirror of the last. Long hours spent in cramped offices, at community centers, in the homes of families who had little to give, but always a sense of deep gratitude for the help she offered. She had learned to see her work as a calling, not a job. She would spend hours listening to stories of hardship, using whatever tools she had to help people find a way out. But the weight of the world often wore her down. Financial difficulties followed her everywhere, as did the constant hum of worry about the future. Still, she pressed on. She kept her focus, kept doing the work, even when she wondered if she would ever find relief. It was on one of those dreary, overcast afternoons, after a long day filled with paperwork and tense meetings, that her world shifted. The rain tapped against the windows, its rhythm soothing yet endless, as she stacked the last of the files into a drawer, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. She was about to head home to yet another quiet, solitary evening when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but its tone immediately caught her attention. Calm, smooth, confident. "Ms. Harris?" the voice asked. "This is Victor Lawson. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow. Can you come by a cafe near your office around 10 a.m.? The name didn't ring a bell, and there was no context to the call. Just an invitation, and a brief mention that it was important. She told herself to ignore the growing sense of unease gnawing at her stomach, dismissing it as nothing more than her usual caution. But when she hung up the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted with her, but the call felt too deliberate to be anything trivial. The next morning, she arrived at the cafe early, unsure of what to expect. It was a cozy spot, small tables scattered about, each one illuminated by soft light from the large windows. She spotted him almost immediately. A tall man in a dark suit, his features sharp, his posture relaxed but commanding. He stood when she approached, offering a warm, reassuring smile, as if they were old friends instead of strangers. "Ms. Harris," he said, his voice calm yet full of authority. "It's an honor to meet you." Maria sat down, still unsure of why she was there. The man introduced himself again, his name sounding more familiar now. Victor Lawson. She had heard of the Lawson family, of course, but only in passing. They were wealthy, powerful, people who lived in a world far removed from the life she knew. She found herself wondering, in the back of her mind, if she had misheard him. But before she could ask, he continued, his eyes meeting hers with a depth that held her captive. "You saved my daughter, Lily. I've never been able to fully express how much that means to me." "To us," he said, his voice betraying a deep, sincere gratitude. Lily? The same little girl Maria had rescued years ago? She had no idea who her family was. The child's story had slipped from her mind with the years, though she had often wondered what had happened to her. And now, here was this man, telling her she had saved his daughter, his billionaire daughter. The weight of his words hit her harder than expected, a soft ache blossoming in her chest. Victor then laid out an offer that Maria could barely comprehend. A job. An executive role at Lawson Enterprises. Maria blinked, her mind racing to catch up with the words spilling from his lips. It seemed too unreal, like a strange dream. She had always been a social worker, a servant to others' needs. The idea that she could be invited into the inner circles of power, a position with such authority, left her speechless. But the surprises didn't end there. Victor reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. "This is a token of my gratitude," he said, almost casually, but his eyes studied her intently. The check inside was for $250,000. The sum seemed impossible, overwhelming. Maria felt a rush of confusion flood her mind. Why was he offering her so much? Was this just about gratitude for saving his daughter, or was there something more? She stared at the check, her thoughts racing, heart pounding. It was an overwhelming gift, one that could change her life. She hesitated, her instincts pulling her toward caution. Was this really what it seemed? Was there some hidden agenda behind this man's generosity? But as Victor continued to reassure her, his words soft but firm, she felt something stir inside her, a flicker of hope, but also a deep wariness. Victor leaned in, his voice lowering, almost as if he knew her hesitation. This is just the beginning of a new journey for you. Your life is about to change in ways you can't even imagine. His words were both a promise and a challenge. Maria was no fool. She knew that life had a way of offering things that weren't always as they seemed. But in that moment, she felt a pull, an uncertain sense that perhaps, just perhaps, this man was offering her a way out, a way into something bigger than she ever thought possible. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to step into a new life, one where the endless struggle for survival might not always be at the forefront. The check was there, the job offer real. But what kind of world would she be stepping into? And what was the cost of the chance she was being offered? Maria didn't know, but she could feel that she was standing on the edge of something monumental. And for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure whether she was ready to jump. Maria sat at her polished mahogany desk, her fingers tracing the edges of the report in front of her. The golden clock on the wall ticked with an unsettling precision, its sound echoing in the otherwise silent office. She had been here for 6 months now, and yet, the weight of it all, the lavishness of the building, the sharp-suited men and women who passed by her desk with nods of approval, still felt like a foreign world she didn't quite belong to. The salary was more money than she had ever dreamed of earning. The office, overlooking the sprawling city, was hers. A space filled with the finest furniture, an imposing desk, and bookshelves full of titles that spoke to power and influence. It felt like a dream, like something that should belong to someone else. She often caught herself staring out the window, watching the cars below like distant, mundane things, feeling more like a visitor than an occupant. Victor's generosity had been overwhelming. The house he helped her find was tucked away in a quiet, expensive neighborhood, with manicured lawns and neighbors whose names she rarely remembered. His team of assistants had made sure she was always comfortable, too comfortable. At first, she had felt grateful, even honored. She told herself it was her reward for years of hard work, a new chapter in her life. But as time passed, something inside her began to shift. It started with small things, offhand comments, whispered words from the other executives, a slight unease whenever she asked too many questions. She'd come to realize that Victor, for all his charm and outward warmth, was not quite the man he appeared to be. Her role at Lawson Enterprises had expanded quickly, moving beyond managing social programs to overseeing high-profile projects. Files stacked in her office, each one more confidential than the last. She was trusted with private data, internal affairs, secrets she had no right to know. It was strange, like watching the intricate gears of a machine she couldn't quite understand. At first, she believed it was simply part of her new role, a recognition of her capability, a step towards something greater. But then the nature of the files became darker, more morally ambiguous. They didn't just contain financial data or market projections. There were hush deals, irregular payments, and transactions that left a bitter taste in her mouth. Victor had often praised her ability to navigate these complex situations, but there were moments when she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, an expectation, a silent command. She was a cog in a much larger machine, and the truth was slowly unfurling before her eyes. At first, she told herself it was just business, complicated, detached, full of choices that didn't always fit neatly into right or wrong. But as she dug deeper, as she was pulled into more and more of Victor's questionable dealings, she could no longer justify it. The corporate empire she had admired from afar had a darker underbelly. Behind the polished suits and million-dollar contracts was a world of manipulation, shady partnerships, and outright exploitation. Victor's charm now felt like a mask, hiding the true face of the empire he had built. Maria's heart ached with every new revelation. She had spent her life fighting for justice, for the kind of integrity that seemed so absent from the world around her now. She thought of the people she had once helped, the families in desperate need of guidance, and how she had believed, with every ounce of her being, that her work mattered. But here, in this towering skyscraper, surrounded by wealth and power, it felt as though those ideals had been stripped away. She had risen to the top, yes, but at what cost? The weight of her success began to crush her spirit. She had traded the injustice of her former life for a different kind, one that wrapped itself in glossy brochures and handshakes with billionaires, one that demanded silence in exchange for wealth. Maria often found herself staring at the files, her hands trembling as she skimmed over the figures, the numbers that represented lives, families, the hidden toll of corporate greed. She couldn't escape the growing realization that she had become a pawn in Victor's game, unknowingly complicit in something that threatened to destroy the very values she once held dear. The question gnawed at her. Was she willing to abandon everything she had stood for in exchange for this new life? Could she continue to work for a man who, beneath the surface, was nothing more than a master manipulator? She had learned that trust, in this world, was not a gift. It was a tool. And it had come at a price Maria was no longer sure she could afford. The mirror in her office reflected a version of herself she didn't recognize. Her hair, once loose and carefree, was now neatly pulled back. Her clothes, tailored, expensive, had become her armor, disguising the woman inside. She wasn't sure if she could go back to who she was before. Maybe she had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Or maybe there was still time to change her path, to find a way out before it was too late. Maria sat back in her chair, the heavy silence of the room closing in around her. She had gained so much. But now, she wondered, at what cost had that gain come? The office was quiet, save for the faint hum of the city below, a steady rhythm of life that seemed so distant from the turmoil inside Maria's chest. She leaned forward, her hands resting on the cool surface of her desk, her eyes fixed on the towering buildings across the street. The reflection in the glass seemed like a stranger's. She didn't recognize the woman who now stood behind a desk like this, one draped in luxury, the weight of power shifting with every decision she made. It was supposed to be a dream, a culmination of all her struggles, but in the silence, in the stillness of the night, it felt hollow. Her thoughts spun in a tight circle. Victor, his promises, the choices she'd made, the secrets she'd kept. She thought of her past, of the work that had once made her heart beat with purpose. The injustice she had faced, the people she had fought for, all felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the glaring reality of what she had become. She had longed for change, for an opportunity to make a real difference. But what had she really done? Had she sold her soul for a taste of success? A soft knock broke her reverie. She hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't felt the intrusion, but somehow she knew who it was. Her heart skipped a beat. The door creaked open, and there she was. Lily. She looked different now, stronger, her posture confident, her eyes bright with purpose. Gone were the days of fear and trembling. This woman was someone Maria didn't recognize, and yet, there was something deeply familiar about her presence. She had grown into herself in a way Maria hadn't expected. She was no longer the vulnerable girl Maria had saved on a cold, rainy night years ago. She was now a force in her own right, a successful attorney whose determination to protect the vulnerable mirrored the very values that Maria had once fought so hard for. Lily's smile was warm, but it didn't mask the weight of what she carried. She sat down next to Maria, her gaze steady, unwavering. "You saved me, Maria," Lily said, her voice no longer tinged with the fragility of a child. "And now it's my turn to save you." The words struck Maria like a thunderclap, a revelation that crashed into her consciousness. The child she had rescued was now the one offering her salvation. It was as if the universe had folded, bringing them full circle. Lily, so much older now, so much wiser, had not only survived, but thrived. And in her thriving, she had uncovered the very corruption that had pulled Maria into this world of excess and moral decay. Lily's voice grew firm, determined. "I've found it, Maria. I've found the evidence. Victor's empire isn't what it seems. It's built on lies, on secrets, on actions that go beyond legal boundaries." She paused, meeting Maria's gaze. "I'm not asking you to walk away from everything you've built. I'm asking you to stand with me. We expose him. We expose the truth." Maria's heart raced. The weight of the moment was overwhelming, as if all the years of struggle, all the decisions she had made, had led to this point. Her journey had not been what she had expected. The promises of wealth and success had lured her in, but it was this, the fight for truth, the reclaiming of her integrity, that truly called to her. The choice was clear, yet so much heavier than anything she had ever faced. To stand beside Lily meant not just taking down Victor, but reclaiming herself. It meant confronting the world she had willingly entered, and confronting the parts of herself that had once turned a blind eye to the very injustices she now sought to undo. For a long moment, Maria didn't speak. She simply looked at Lily, seeing in her the reflection of a woman who had never lost her way, a woman who had been shaped by her past, but had not been consumed by it. In that instant, Maria understood. Her life, as twisted and complicated as it had become, had brought her to this very moment. The choices had been hard, the cost immense, but this was where she was meant to be. Not as a pawn in Victor's game, but as a player of her own, standing tall, fighting for what was right. Maria finally stood, a new resolve settling in her bones. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady, the weight of her decision sinking in with the clarity of truth. "Let's expose him." Lily smiled, a proud glimmer in her eyes. Together, they would bring the empire down. Together, they would rewrite their destinies. Maria no longer felt the burden of being a small player in someone else's world. She was a queen in her own right now, her path no longer defined by the lies of others, but by her own truth. And for the first time in a long while, Maria felt the strength to rebuild her life, not with the trappings of wealth and power, but with the integrity and courage she had always fought for.